Ruins Excavation, presented by Hadley Rill Books, edited by Eric T Reynolds, with Rose Reynolds and Emmeline Wolfe, foreword by Nisi Shawl, narrated by Darla Middlebrook. Foreword by Nisi Shawl. Hearts of carnelian, hearts of bitumen, hearts of Aztec gold. The hearts of these stories' heroines pulse to the beat of discovery, the rhythm of knowledge. Sometimes that knowledge is completely new, but more often it is old, lost for centuries to dust and whispers. The task of reclaiming the knowledge of the past, a past in some cases corresponding to our present and future, falls to women within these pages. With brush and rifle and bioengineered bugs, with psychometry and spreadsheets, this anthology's imagined archaeologists excavate secrets hidden in the depths of the earth and the depths of their own selves. As women are often trained to do, they look down, though not necessarily in meekness. They calculate, they observe, they share. Who hasn't wanted to dig for buried treasure? Picking up this book is the next best thing to picking up a map and a trawl. Whether outsiders to the culture whose riches they seek, or their undisputed heirs, the heroines of Ruins Excavation stand in for all of us as they explore sites of legend, respectfully, carefully, and wonderfully. That is, with hearts full of wonder. Introduction by Eric T Reynolds, Rose Reynolds, and Emmeline Wolfe. Archaeological ruins serve as gateways to other cultures, to other times and places. In 2013, we issued a call for submissions to authors to write a science fiction or fantasy story set in or about ruins with a protagonist who is a woman of color archaeologist. The women who excavate the ruins in these stories explore cultures from across the checkerboard of humanity and encounter unexpected presences, not necessarily human, as they work to not only add pieces to the human jigsaw puzzle of life, but also demonstrate who and where we are in our place within the cosmos. ETR, RR, and EW, Overland Park and Lawrence, Kansas, August 2015. Cover Her Ghost with a Feathered Cape by Jennifer Crow. Rust-red dust sifted down as Lucia Alvarez shook the screen, revealing bits of pottery, stark white with black geometric figures. Sacred pottery, broken when the last people to inhabit this place walked away, their ritual places burning behind them. Lucia liked to think of her own ancestors traveling with them, priests and priestesses out of the southern lands, bearing tales of ferocious gods and wealth beyond dreaming. The people of the Colorado watershed, the ones later settlers called Anasazi, had far-flung trade relationships, even as far south as Mayan territory, and her research helped establish those links. She imagined envoys arriving, resplendent in their tropical furs and feathers. They'd have walked up wide roads marked with towers and beacon fires, or perhaps been carried by servants they'd captured. Would they have brought warriors too, or come with economic hegemony in mind? A quick gulp from her canteen, and the warm metallic tang of the water washed away the grit that coated her tongue and teeth. She ignored the buzzing at the base of her skull that told her someone was trying to reach her. Layers of time blanketed her. The shimmering heat pressed down, and for the moment, she could forget everything except her immediate purpose. "Work is a blessing," she murmured, quoting her grandmother. As a child, she hadn't understood what the words meant, But now she used them to build a wall around her darkest thoughts. A bead of sweat trickled from her hairline until an impatient brush of her forearm smeared it away. The hard, clear eye of the sun had burnished her brown skin to deep mahogany, and she wished she'd cropped her curly hair short before landing in the back country. Perhaps when evening came and it was too dark to work, she'd find a knife in her supplies and cut it all off. There was no one here to care if she looked ridiculous. She sat back on her heels and studied the site. A great kiva's broken walls jutted out of the ground to her right, like a gaping maw. Where she crouched at one end of a trench, rooms branched off from that central point. Behind her, the ancient builders had constructed their settlement in a shallow cave, scooped from the rock by ages of wind and water. More buildings stood guard at the canyon rim, and the signs of gardens and more homes crowded beside the stream in the canyon depths. The man who discovered this place a century earlier had called it El Jefe, the chief. Lucia thought she'd give it a new name before she finished her work here. But she wanted to live in it for a time first, feel its soul in her bones. Only then would she understand its innermost holy self. She smiled at her own pretension. After only a couple weeks alone, she sounded more like a religion professor than an archaeologist. The best way to tell the story of a people, she'd always believed, was to look at the simple goods and arts that made up their everyday lives. That point of reference formed the foundation of any understanding. Yet how could she deny the deep spiritual base of life in this arid place? Any civilization in the Redstone lands had lived here at the sufferance of their gods. And after the ecological and social devastation of the 21st century, even the few brave souls who'd made the desert their home had vanished. Most had moved to the security of the great cities, all that was left after the collapse of the United States. The rest had died of disease or starvation. The hum from the implant in her skull grew too insistent to ignore any longer. Lucia tapped it, her teeth gritted. "Mother, how could you?" "Yolanda, a little loud." "Because I'm angry. I can't believe you'd strand yourself out there." Lucia stifled a sigh and picked up a trowel, scraping gently at a mass of broken pottery to tease out individual shards. "I've found lots of black on white ritual pieces, and some lovely polychrome, evidence the people here were trading with settlements to the south." "You're going to die out there, Mother?" Yolanda's voice broke, and Lucia's heart twinged. "I was going to die in the city. I chose to come here instead." She dug the tip of the trowel into the dust, grounding herself in the reality of the place. "I love you so much, Yolanda." "Then come home. Dr. Yazzie said he could send a team for you." "He shouldn't have said that. I won't go." She brushed at her eyes where traitorous tears had formed. "I'm like a cat, Corazon. I don't want everyone hovering while I fade and expire. I'll just find a quiet place and pull the night around me." "Stop. Just stop." "Give your father my regards. Tell him I'm grateful to him for the gift of you." Lucia laid her hand at the nape of her neck, pressing the implant's activator, and to Yolanda's voice disappeared in static that blurred to silence. She was glad the implant didn't allow video conversations. If she'd seen her daughter's face, she might have weakened. "This is my place," she murmured. The broken bits of pottery kept her attention until evening crept in. As shadows stretched across the site, she packed up her tools and trudged back to her camp. Late in the day, after hours stooping, the aches grew fierce. Something degenerative, the doctor told her. Genetics and environment working together to kill her slowly. Experimental drugs slowed the progression down, but the side effects dulled her thoughts. At last, she'd decided to make the most of what time she had. So long as she had strength, she meant to reach into the past and shake free some secrets. Too much had been lost already. Lucia rubbed at her shoulder where a bone-deep ache settled. She was pondering what she hoped to accomplish on the morrow when a light sparkling on the canyon rim above caught her attention. A faint tang of wood smoke hung in the air. Curiosity and concern together sent her in search of the source. As night closed in, she pulled a lantern from her pack and wound the crank that powered it. Even with light, the path was treacherous, loose gravel slipping underfoot and branches scratching at her face. She skidded once, then again, but by then she'd passed the halfway point of the climb, so she decided to keep going rather than try to descend. Rich-scented sage and pungent stunted creosote brush provided handholds, and at last she pulled herself over the brink. The muscles in her legs trembled, so she lay for a time on stone that still radiated the day's heat. No storm had rolled through. No lightning strike could have sparked that blaze. Lucia held the lantern high and trudged forward. Anger crawled in the pit of her stomach at the halting pace that was the most she could manage. Somehow she'd convinced herself she'd have the rest of the summer and fall to work. It seemed her body had other plans. A low mound hid the fire, the shrouded ruins of some long-forgotten tower or kiva. When Lucia reached the top, her lantern gleaming on pot shards half exposed in the dirt, the fire had dimmed, fading to embers. "Hello?" she called, though she knew no one else was out in the wilderness. No one answered, and she laughed at herself. Still, she couldn't deny the evidence of her eyes. Someone had laid a circle of stones and cleared away the dead brush. Someone who had left footprints in the soft sand around the dying blaze. She tried to follow the tracks, but they vanished just outside the sandy hollow. Sudden weariness struck Lucia, so she sat and closed her eyes. Morning light woke her, spears of light cast across the desert. Though she ached all over, she'd slept solidly. With care, she bent and examined the scene. The ashes were cold, already almost buried by drifting sand. If she'd just come across it, she'd have thought the fire had burned decades earlier. The footprints blurred, edges softened by a wind that blew steadily from the west. Lucia considered the ashes. After a while, she admitted to herself that it wasn't a mystery she could solve, not with the evidence at hand. So she returned to the lower site. To her surprise, when she reached the wide ledge that held the great kiva, she saw that a crack had appeared in the ground. She eased around its edges, examining potential weak places. Where the sun and the lantern shed light on the darkness, she saw deeper masonry walls, scraps of basketry, signs of a much older settlement beneath the ruins she'd been studying. Impatient, she tapped her implant switch and asked for a connection to Professor Hosteen Yazzie. "Lucia, what's happened? Are you well?" He'd insisted that she call if anything went wrong, but it irked her a little that he assumed that was her purpose. "The most amazing thing. I'll send you a video soon, but I had to talk about it with someone." She explained what she'd found. "It looks undisturbed. I'm not planning to go in, not yet." "If you can't resist, touch as little as possible and document everything." For Yazi, it was an unprecedented